Mhm. Let me know, Amy.
Oh, and we need a screenshot too, because look at this. Look at all the beauty on the screen. Good grief.
Amy, are we good to go?
That's right.
Yep, we're live.
Oh, and we're live.
I did get a nice screenshot of that though.
That's Black Femme. That's some Black Femme joy right there.
That really is. It really is. So thank you all for joining. I'm going to get comfortable. And for those that are in this room that are watching right now, my name is Ifeoma Ike. I am the daughter of Charles and Bernice. I am a lawyer. I am a disruptor. I'm a proud CUNY Law graduate and also CUNY adjunct, but I'm also senior advisor for Dianne Morales, who is running to be the next mayor of New York City.
I'm gonna be a little silly. You know, I'm gonna be a little silly, right? Because I feel like I'm in my tribe. Yeah, this is.
It's still, you know, we're bridging Black, Her Story Month with Women's History Month and Women's Her Story Month, and we wanted to have a conversation that not only bridged the two, celebrated, even in the midst of this pandemic and had a little joy, but also we wanted to have a community conversation because what's really important to Dianne is to make sure that those who are doing the work are really central to how things get done. Dianne knows, and I've told the story many times, I wasn't going to be working for anybody this year because I was tired and I want to go somewhere where I don't have to be working. The reality is, for many of us who've worked in the city, when I sat and thought about some of the work that many of these women on this call have been doing for years, I really thought about, wow, all the marching that we've done, all the protests, everything that we've done. And we're actually at a moment where we can really think about who needs to be where. And that was largely what had me say, I'm excited to participate and work with Dianne. So before we have Dianne introduce herself, I wanted to make sure that each of our wonderful, amazing guests introduce themselves. My pronouns are she, her, so please share your pronouns. And as you introduce yourself in this Black Femme Future Imagination conversation, I want you to take a look back really quickly, and I want you to share either your favorite Black feminist or your favorite or most inspirational Black feminist movement. And so I'm going to start with you. I'm going to start with you, Shawnda, if you could lead us, and then I'll call on the next person.
Okay, so good evening. Thank you, Dianne and Ify, for curating this conversation and for the opportunity to stop and just dream for a moment about the future of Black women, girls, and femmes in New York City, and to do that together. Like I said, my name is Shawnda Chapman, she, her. Over the last decade or so, my work has really attempted to address inequality and injustice broadly, with a focus on centering the needs and the experiences of marginalized folks. This ranges for me from research, policy, and advocacy work to now directing a major national philanthropic initiative to support the leadership, the organizing, and the movement building of girls of color in the US. But beyond what I do, I think that it's really important to note that I come to this conversation as a Black woman, as a Black woman who is the descendant of enslaved people. I'm also a queer Black woman, a fat Black woman, and a Black woman from a working class family background. I identify as a survivor of sexual violence, of domestic violence, and someone who has experienced the criminal justice system broadly. I'm a mean Uno player. I can make really good cornbread. I also really appreciate this invitation to start by considering our favorite Black feminists, though I have to tell you that it's really impossible for me to name just one. The invitation reminds me of that practice growing up in the Black church of giving honor, right? And so I think I'm gonna just do it like that. So I give honor to the Black feminists whose shoulders I stand on. Black feminists like Harriet Tubman, like Sojourner Truth, Fannie Lou Hamer, and Ida B. Wells. To Black women, to Black feminists who dare to dream for us, through their art and their writing, like June Jordan and Audre Lorde, Toni Morrison, and Zora Neale Hurston. To folks like the living and breathing Black feminists that I learn from, and whose work informs my work every day, like Bell Hooks, like Patricia Hill Collins, like Dorothy Pittman Hughes, like Demita Frazier and the Sisters of the Combahee Collective. And like for real, to those out there putting in that work, like Farrah Tannis, like Savannah Brown, like Brittany Cooper, like Elle Hearns, Miriam Kaba, Tarana Burke, Joanne Smith, Monica Simpson, like Lala Zanel and Octavia Lewis. I don't want to forget folks like Teresa Younger and Monique Morris, and to countless names that you're never going to get to know. Like my friends and colleagues, Roz Lee, like folks like Shannon Reeves and Luana Kimbrough. And I could do this all night, because my Black feminist squad runs deep. And I'm sorry to those I didn't name, but I'll stop myself here.
Thank you, Shawnda. Thank you, Shawnda. It's always good when you name people that people know, because it's like, yeah, that's right. And thank you for reminding us that there are people, there are legends among us, right, that are in our midst. So thank you so much for that high bar introduction. You almost brought everybody in. I don't know who's left, but I'm gonna let the rest of them um, jump in. So I'm gonna go to you, Qiana. And again, thank you for joining us this Sunday.
Thank you. Now, that is a high bar to follow. So I'm gonna do my best, but I feel welcomed in this space. I'm really happy to be here. I'm happy to see folks here already, folks that are joining. I feel honored to be a part of this conversation. A little bit about like me. I mean, my name is Qiana Mickie. I was born in Richmond, Virginia, but my roots are really rooted in the Bronx, and I've been a Harlem resident for about 15 years. My son was born in the Bronx and lived here in Harlem, still really reps the Bronx. And I feel like, when Shawnda was like speaking about like the intro, so many things like came into like my mind in terms of like my connections to my community and my work. And I do feel like, I speak often around like solidarity economy and building solidarity, but that also means like there's a reciprocal nature to it. So even though like my work kind of has moved from like the local to the international, I think it always brings me back to my community. I don't feel like I'm that much further from, walking around in Harlem and seeing some of the work that I've done, or just my community and how I continue to be informed by the folks on the ground. And same in the Bronx, like no matter how far I go, I feel like I still kind of hit the same steps from like where I was 5 years old, 7 years old, 12 years old, and seeing like the women that were unheralded in that work or informing me as a child or as a girl, but also just our community and keeping us whole and keeping us moving forward. And I'm really glad that you like lifted those names and the names that you didn't lift, because I think we all hold folks like that in our heart and in our space. A little bit about my work. In the last 10 years, a lot of my work has like been intersecting or weaving within government agencies, in community, and in nonprofits, in the realms of like equitable policy, food justice, and community engagement. I see myself as an activist and a leader and a speaker, but again, really rooted in trying to be a bridge to what's forward and trying to see how I can like take a step forward and bring folks with me in that. And in that trajectory from being a community advocate to working within nonprofits or working as a consultant, back to being a consultant in a Black women-led consulting firm that I started recently, QJ and Multiprise, really trying to use food as a driver for change, innovation, and equity, providing leadership to nonprofits and private businesses, community-based organizations to integrate equity holistically within operations and resource allocation, meeting mission and budget. And again, too, I couldn't pick one. Well, I struggled to pick one icon, but because many come to mind, but I did want to lift up Pauli Murray tonight. And I picked her in particular because I think what I've been kind of coming back to is not only how she was a complex and multifaceted person, but she envisioned bold transformative change in law, something that we feel is very systemic and doesn't change. She found ways, they found ways to change that and saw opportunities where other people couldn't fathom or people didn't want, and was very years ahead of her time and embodied in intersectionality in that work, in organizing, in law and praxis, and in civil rights, women rights, worker rights. And I find myself kind of coming back to their work and their struggle and also their successes to really see how I can, and how that can inform how to lay groundwork in the ways that I want to do with community now. So I wanted to bring them into the space.
Thank you. Thank you for bringing them in the space. This space is huge. We're carrying a lot of people, and we haven't even gotten to Arielle yet. And Arielle got a little one in the space too. So welcome, Arielle.
Hey.
How are you?
I'm doing good. So yes, in the background, you might hear a very precocious 7-month-old blowing some raspberries. So I'm not going to apologize for that. I think that's what we need. But I just want to give folks the heads up. And I guess he's a lot of the reason why I'm here tonight. I am a single mother, a single Black woman living in New York City. And I absolutely believe that it's high time for New York City to reflect more people like me, people like us, and less of the people who can afford to take care of themselves, less of the people who got rich off of the death of 500,000 people, less of folks who have spread disinformation, have spread lies, have stoked fear and ignorance and racism and xenophobia and nativism, but then we're first in line to get vaccines. There's something very wrong about that. Right? There's something very evil about that. And I think it's time that we, as we've always been doing, we correct those wrongs and we transform this world in a way that's a bit more reflective of justice, of dignity, of truth, of compassion, of humanity. And I try to show that in my work. As a founder of the Black Giving Fund, we marshal resources to Black liberationists, other Black folks who are making change through organizing, activism, the creative arts, and other types of social justice causes and initiatives. And in that little pocket of the universe, we provide a lot of funding to mostly Black women and Black non-binary people as well. And the solidarity economy, in large part, is how Black women have mobilized and have met our needs. I think we all have a story of a grandmother, of an aunt, of a cousin, of a woman down the street who gave you a cup of sugar if you needed it, who watched you after school, who gave you some diapers, or told you the secrets and the stories of raising children. And I know they showed up for me and my little one. I know that they've showed up for all of us in many ways. So to your question about which calling up some Black women and Black feminists who have done great things, I think that the people who I carry are the women of the Black Panther Party. I know we're very used to seeing a certain image of who the Black Panthers were, but 60% of their membership were women. And I think that's key and critical. I also carry, my own ancestors and the stories that have been told to me now that I've entered into motherhood, and I'm truly honored and humbled to be here with you all, and I'm looking forward to the discussion tonight. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Arielle. And last to speak, but definitely not least, Diane Morales, I want to pose to you the same question, allow you to introduce yourself. And also just want to congratulate you. Right before this happened, you got another endorsement from CODA. So congratulations. Um,
Thank you.
anytime for anyone who has helped a candidate, a Black woman candidate, especially on a local level, anytime support can come through. It's not a small thing. And we applaud you for how you're trying to hold um, communities that have been marginalized at the forefront. But tonight is really about us and our power. So I wanted to ask you the same question to introduce yourself. And then when you think of Black feminists, Black femfolk, Black women, what stands out for you?
Mm-hmm. So thank you for that question. Thank you all for being here. It is really nice to think about sort of ending the day, ending the month, and starting the next month in this community in particular right now in this way. This is a grind, this journey that we are on. I am grateful for all of the blessings along the way, and also for all of the opportunities to gather in community and sort of replenish. And this to me feels like that. So I am Dianne Morales. I am candidate for New York City mayor. I am I am Black daughter of Borinquen, born and raised in Bed-Stuy. I am, I am at the intersection of the Taino tribe, the Borinquen, the African ancestors that all sort of flow through my veins. Born and raised in the hood, single mother as well, of 2 young adults, a survivor also, and survivor of multiple systems too, right? And the dysfunctions and the impositions and the oppression that those systems attempt to and do sometimes often impose on our lives. I have been, working in the community to elevate our people and to help create space for our people and help provide access for our folks, our communities, for as long as I can remember. I think even before I really had the critical analysis to name what the work was, I felt called to it and drawn to it and aware of something deeply rooted and systemic and structural being highly problematic, but leaned into the work long before I could actually articulate it in the ways that we will begin to do tonight throughout the course of this conversation, undoubtedly. When I think about this work, I think about, I never would have thought that I'd be running for office, and, I'm not going to go too far down that rabbit hole right now. But I do see it as a natural extension of, interestingly enough, a natural extension of a journey I didn't even realize that I was on, right? In terms of getting to this point, I feel like I am exactly where I'm supposed to be. I have long been a believer of the idea that the only way that we really create change is through community and with community power. And so to find myself kind of on this path feels a little bit ironic, I think, but also at the same time, it makes total sense. And we can talk about that more later. I think, in answer to the question, Shawnda listed all the, not all of them, but I was sitting here going, okay, well, wait, you said that one, she said that one, so it's kind of like, okay, let me think about this. But I will say I got asked this question at the Black Women's Political Club last week. And I, the first thing I came up with, the first person that came to mind was actually Angela Davis, for, reasons I don't even need to explain to this group, right? But I gotta shout out again Audre Lorde, because I often quote her. Audre Lorde and Shirley Chisholm often come up in my remarks on this campaign trail for different reasons, but Audre Lorde specifically in and I don't want to butcher it, but she talks about there not being any single issue struggles because there's no single issue people, right? And that complexity and that sort of integrated understanding and perspective is one that I think our government has failed to recognize, and our leaders often fail to recognize. And so that's a critical tenet of how I think we need to be thinking about our futures. And then Shirley Chisholm, right? Unbought and unbossed. And being from Bed-Stuy, I think that there's a sort of a calling there. And then interestingly enough, I think the other side that calls to me is the Sonia Sanchez's, the Celia Cruz, the art side, the pioneers who have not just sort of bridged uncharted territory in their existence, but also very much embrace their sort of intersectional identities. And so, yeah, so that's where I'm at. I'm really excited to, just great to even look on the screen and see so much of us and so much beauty. And I'm deeply appreciative of this opportunity and this conversation. Thank you all for being here tonight.
Thank you all. Thank you all for bringing and opening up. I think when we invite other people that have inspired us, they're also part of the conversation. I have worked for the city of New York. I have worked in other government spaces. I don't think anybody has ever asked me what a Black feminist future could look like in a government setting, right? So I want to open. I also realized I didn't mention my Black feminist. There's so many, and I'm going to give honor to. I'm going to take Shawnda's approach because there's really no favorite. That's almost asking like, what's your favorite like Luther Vandross song? It's like, why would you do that? You know what I mean? Why would you do that? But I think I would have answered differently up until yesterday. I was actually reading a case in the like African American Museum Smithsonian section about the case that really threatened a lot of Black women, former slaves, actually in Haiti, and how the prosecution of voodoo led to, a lot of different things as it relates to what people and Indigenous folks could practice. So as we start this conversation, I also want to think and invite all the things that have in many ways been beaten out of us, beaten out of our communities, have been suppressed, have been told it's not good enough, have been told it's not up to the standard. And yet here we are, saving our people, doing all the things that we need to do, essential workers coming through, saving our people. So this is an intentional conversation, not as one of othering, but actually one of inclusion, right? And that we want people to see this conversation as one that acknowledges both genius and also acknowledges problem solving, because we've never been in a position where we didn't have to problem solve. So I want to just open it up to the floor. I want this to be a chatty conversation. And the first question that I have to everyone is really, and it's really the conversation, like, why should we embrace a city where Black feminism is central or even a major part of how we imagine what a city that provides dignity for everyone could look like? And anyone can take, we have about like 5 or 7 minutes to have this conversation, but anyone can take the first stab at that part.
Oh, I'm happy to jump in because it's like Black feminism, just one to have a space where we start off talking about why Black feminism is necessary. So I'm like, me, calling me, I'm ready, I'm jumping in. So y'all, first of all, just so that we, sort of build a shared language together, for me, the idea of Black feminism is feminism. It is feminism, right? It's the idea, in its most simple, that humans are equal regardless of their sex or gender identity. And it's the concept that we should all have the ability to be self-determinate, to be safe, to be free from oppression, and to be able to live into our fullest potential. For me, Black feminism, or the idea of Black feminism, is specifically a response to the failures of mainstream feminism. In particular, for me, it acknowledges that it is impossible to separate the other categories of identity, like race, like sexuality and ability, from gender. And that doing so has catastrophic political and social consequences for Black women. For me, Black feminists argue that these categories, they don't operate independently at all, like you were mentioning, Diane, and that, in fact, they relate together through a process that we describe as intersectionality, where the categories of identity interact and compound on each other to create systematic social inequality. In practice, though, for me, this can be seen in the fact that Black women and girls are more likely to experience incarceration, that we are paid cents on the dollar compared to our peers, and where throughout the nation's education system, Black girls are suspended at disproportionately high rates, I think 6 times more than their white peers in New York City. And it can also be seen in the fact that like these experiences have a tendency to then be ignored in the media, in public policy, and in research. And for me, having just that lack of intersectional policymaking understanding then kind of leaves us with policies that say contradictory and stupid shit. Like, it's cruel to separate children from their mothers at the border. All the while, we have a long ass history and legacy of separating Black children from Black mothers in Black communities. It also sort of leaves us with understandings like, it's wrong. It's really wrong to experience sexual harassment at work. I'm looking at you, Governor Cuomo. But then also criminalizes survivors of violence who are like more likely to be Black, brown, LGBTQ, and trans. So yeah, I think I'll stop there. Because it's Sunday and I'm breezy. I'm saying too much.
You're not saying too much. I mean.
Yes. Wait, I just so I had one thing I had to write down when you were talking about Black feminism, right? And you talked about it in response to the failures of white feminism. And the thing that occurred to me in that moment, I think it's the epitome of a response to the failures of society, right? Because it goes so far beyond just white feminism. Yeah. It's all of the failures.
Yes.
Right. And so, Black feminism to me is like the remedy to all our ills. Right. And if we are able to actually embrace it and practice it and fully implement it, then we'll all be all right. Right. Like there is something about that. What I see you, Iffy. I see you.
I'm with you.
Right.
Just took all my notes, just took all my little comments.
Sorry. Well, but we can unpack it. We can unpack it, right? Because Shawnda was just talking about all the, the wages and all of that, right? And yes. Well, I'm going, well, yeah. And also let's talk about this past year, right? The COVID, the essential workers, right? 79% of the New York City workforce is the essential workers, right? And yet, and 79% of the essential workers in New York City are Black and brown people, right? And 63% of them are women, right? And then you start to unpack that into the death tolls, and 62%, that was us, right? So it's essentially, to me, Black feminism is the response to all of the ills and all of the dysfunctions in the society within which we live. And that's why for me, one of the things I talk about is like, well, if we address this, then everybody's going to benefit. Like, exactly. And it feels a little bit like overly simplified, but it's kind of like.
Yeah. But the evidence is there. I mean, I think, when we look at voting history, national voting history, otherwise, when we look at the impacts in our communities and struggles, like we see that Black women and Black feminists, we're like the bellwethers. Like while our experiences are unique, we are the future. And when we don't have that intersectionality, when it's not acknowledged and when it's not seen, and even in movements, I think even our most modern movements have either fallen or stagnated or regressed at the point of intersectionality, or the points when Black women were saying we need to be amplified, we need to be leaders in this. And that did not happen. And so I think it's what we see, it's what we know to be true in our individual experience, but I think we can look at the women's, you know, the full women's movement, suffragist movement, civil rights movement, when intersectionality wasn't at the core and when Black women weren't really amplified as the genuine leaders, that's where a lot of the decisiveness, the breakdowns really happen. And I think it's that we're living within these social constructs of race, class, and gender. And so, you know, like to me, Black feminism, it's like, I feel the strongest when I'm able to work from a lens of abundance and hold the intersectionality of that. And that's where I'm the strongest as an individual, but also the strongest in how I support solidarity amongst other folks, women and beyond. And if we don't have that, then we don't really support the long-term transformative change that we really want to see. And when I think about those examples of even within movements, when it has happened in that intersectionality piece, or when thinking about policy, I think about like the Young Lords Party and the women within that group that decided to increase women's representation in the platform and the programs and the leadership. And, you know, and there's Latinx women, but there's also Denise Oliver in that space. And when you see that became integrated in the work, so much of it moved. I think there's other examples of that in the Black Panther Party, and even the intersection around race and class with Young Patriots and the Black Panther Party. That's, you know, I still think when women become the leaders of the work, or femmes become the leaders as well, and the dissemination of power is there too, we see the true path forward for everyone.
Just to, you know, hop in, I look at like policy making through the lens of Black feminism or Black women. It's inherently an equity model, right? It's inherently a justice model. It's inherently a way to correct ills and to make account and restitution for them. And it's a way to move past survival and into thriving. And in that respect, and in that way, to have a Black feminist perspective when legislating or designing or crafting institutions and infrastructure to respond to social need, it inherently takes into account differences. It inherently takes into account the variety of background and the diversity of the populace in such a way that things become better for all and better for everyone. I think, like you said, Diane, it's just so simple. It's like actually easy. And the problem is, you know, for whatever reason, for all the reasons, for the reasons that we know, folks don't have the political will to implement, because we also know that when Black women are protected at full, when Black women are thriving, things look a lot different for people who are used to subjugating us. But that is absolutely another conversation.
I mean, is it? I mean, so this is the thing, right? Like, and each of you are super, super modest. The spaces that you all have, that I've seen and I've been privileged to see, kind of beg the question. For me, it's rhetorical at times, like, well, then why aren't we more supportive of not only just representation, but also this concept, right, of literally problem solving mindset that protects all people. And one of the things that I think about is how there was so much that was stripped, or there was so much that was perceived to have been removed from enslaved individuals, that there was a lot about us that they didn't understand, including the fact that we were village folk, right? So even these words that we used around solidarity, economy, and all of this is really village. It's really a village mindset, something you can't beat out of somebody. It's something you can't take away from a people. And the reason why I say that is that I love the way the flow went with each other, because I agree with Shawnda that the concept of a feminist mindset, which, as we all know, the data still shows that there's still a significant amount of the population that thinks that it means it's just focused on women, when that is not the definition. But the definition that it has in its formation, at least in its recognition, because you ask Brittany Cooper will tell you that Black women started feminism, and she will give you the history as to how that came to be. But she also recognizes that feminism in the media has largely been dominated by dominant culture, and that Black feminism is an introduction. It's not as simple as like if it's not white that it's Black. What people didn't realize is that Black people, village folk, come from a place of beyond survival, thrival, achievement, abundance, as Qiana had mentioned, right? And we are trying to build from lack. I mean, if we're honest with ourselves, the statistics that Diane gave, many of us, our families were impacted, are the realities of many cities throughout the United States. New York City has not only a race disparity, but a gender disparity. And we don't even talk about it as a gender disparity if we're honest with ourselves. So when we think about the repair and the recovery, and I'm moving the questions a little bit around because I think I would love to hear some of the solutions you all have been thinking about, not even in just the areas that you focus on, but feel free to amplify your expertise. But when you think about how we start getting into that transformation of applying right now, mandating that our electeds and the people that serve and represent us, how do we start implementing and weaving in an intersectional way of leadership? And how do we hold people accountable for that? Because people will use the buzzwords for sure, but when it comes to accountability, that would mean that the accountability would have to come from the people, right? And then it would have to stick. So I just want to hear from you all. You can go in any order as to, this is a weird, this is a moment, it's not weird. We've been here before, where when things are really, really, seem like they're really destroyed, it's actually a time to problem solve. So I want to think about what is the opportunity that we have right now in this moment for that transformation that we all not only want, but we need.
I think the most, just at its most simple, and I think we're going to build on this, but like, if I show up to one more policy table, to one more sort of research initiative, to one more any initiative that isn't filled with directly impacted people, if I show up to one more, I'm just gonna start talking like this at the thing. I'm gonna be like, so before we start, where are the trans folks? Before we start, where are the people that have been directly impacted by whichever system we're here, to start to think about solutions around? And I don't mean just like phenotypical representation. We have checked off the Black people. We are good folks. No, not at all. I'm thinking about like sort of representation across experience. I want to hear from the poor people. I want to hear from and mind you, I say that sort of like, recognizing where I come from. I want to hear from the folks that we want to hide, that we want to throw away, the ones that we don't want to put up front. Like that is literally like what I want to do. And I think that we can sort of talk specifically sort of about sort of various strategies. And I know that we will, but to begin, you just cannot do anything if you don't start there.
You just nailed kind of, there's been an inherent tension for me, and I don't want to make this about this campaign, but I do want to lift something up that I've been experiencing and see if we can connect it back to this, right? This campaign is really centered around doing exactly what you're talking about, right? The idea of the people who were talking, we're talking about housing or mental health, like let's bring those people to the table and have them at the center, right? And have them driving and leading. And there's activists and there's movements, that talk about doing that same thing. And yet there continues to be this tension where some of those folks want to kind of apply or adhere to like these traditional criteria of how we do this work that don't actually center those communities, right? And I'm learning to be a little bit more diplomatic, because I think part of the reason for years why I was just like, have you met me? I can't do politics. I'm not diplomatic enough. But at the same time, it's fascinating to me and really frustrating to me. And I'm talking about groups that are supposed to be representing us and our communities, and who, you know, that's the space that they want to claim, right? And they want to represent themselves as the change makers, the transform, you know, and yet they're applying this paradigm and these criteria that weren't created by us, they weren't created for us, and they don't serve us.
Mm-hmm.
And so I find myself often at that tension, you know, dealing with that tension. And I wanted to bring that in because I think what you said sort of spoke to that, right? In terms of the way we should be doing this work, and what it should look like. And I'm not offering any solutions. I'm just kind of saying, this is my struggle, right? And I would love to sort of, you know, I'd sort of love to get to how we do this differently. How do we all do this differently, right? Because we need that critical mass of all of us.
Right.
Doing that.
Right. That's right.
Qiana.
I mean, yeah, I'm really glad you said that, because I feel like even in the space of social justice and food justice, we continue to see that where this tension, even within amongst ourselves, the replication of white supremacy or oppressive power in politics, and groups that speak for folks but don't genuinely engage the most impacted folks. And so it's under the guise of racial equity or economic equity, but in fact, it's a perpetration of tokenism and even like Black capitalism in some forms, which I personally don't feel is the trajectory, you know, is the next step or beyond capitalism. Like if it's extractive in nature and if it's exploitative in praxis, then it's not good if that's even folks doing it within ourselves, or leveraging the proximity to power or the proximity to whiteness or white men in order to do that for one group. And I mean, I think on a practical level, what I've seen in terms of like solidarity space or work, or leaders or groups that work from, whether you call it collective impact or models, but genuine mechanisms and opportunities for the folks that are most impacted to be engaged in the praxis of not just the work, but how to inform the policies and inform tables that they may not want to be at, or either bring them to those tables of influence, or engage where you're bringing different policies or changes where you're speaking not for them, but you're speaking in honor of them or in the work that they do. So it feels like it's a genuine energy and like information. And I think times, especially in policy work, the policy game or the process is to engage community at the end of the process. You know, so build the design, build the platform, build the, you know, the stakeholders, bring in the money, do it, and then say, oh, wait, we need a show and pony. Let's bring in community and we'll have these little engagement sessions. So then we can't say, you know, we can check some boxes because we're counting bodies. And then you can't say we didn't tell you, but you didn't really bring us in the process of development and building. And you didn't really engage our capacity builder, genuine groups or leaders in a way that can inform how that's being built and what that looks like. So it's not just principles, or you're engaging folks that we all have heard and seen that are speaking from their individual perspectives and landscapes and not really for the work of the people. And so when you talk about the accountability structures and principles, I think we need that within policy engagement from the grassroots to the grass tops. But I think also what you're speaking to, Diane, too, is how do we build that amongst ourselves? So there's a genuine bridge and connection between that. And then we're not just holding the tension, but we're working through that tension. So we're not perpetrating what has kept us all down, but we're actually building systems to transform the work that we're doing on the ground, true dissemination of resources and capital, but to also then be a genuine way to inform policy. Because at the end of the day, there will be tables that I've heard, even from a farmer perspective side or community leaders, sometimes they want to do the work that they're doing. I want to be a grower. I want policy that I'm informing, but I don't always want to be at that table. So to me, it's always been like the work of how to inform that and bring that voice there, amplify it, and not try to burden them with the work that they don't want to always do, or find genuine ways when they do want to be seen. So we always talk about like stepping up and stepping back, but I think in terms of like genuine practice and accountability is holding ourselves accountable, but really building those like genuine mechanisms to really inform that and then form, you know, the policy. But I think we have to change where we engage community and how do we truly support collective power and collective strength and impact. And I think then we'll start to see some of the changes in policy, so we're not just speaking to the same folks over and over again or in silos.
And I'll just to get back to the like actual, like the practicable level of Black women informing policy, or Black women being at the center of policymaking, I think going forward, any sort of policy needs to have some mechanism of restitution. That's just my personal view. I think that there needs to be a function in place that makes restitution for all that was taken, all that was lost, all that was stolen, all that was ignored, all that was overlooked, all that was extracted. I think that's the way that we begin using a lot of these tools, which were not built for us. That's one mechanism we can use for that. I think, and I don't necessarily know if I'm the most fluent person to push this forward, but I also recognize that there needs to be some sort of understanding of sexual violence imposed on Black women, particularly Black trans women. And I think we can see that, especially thinking about like education policy, for example. So I think of the fact that Black girls are hyper-criminalized in public institutions and schools and things of that nature. I also think of how a lot of the interactions that Black women and girls have with police are actually sexually violent in nature. And we oftentimes see police brutality in the form of some very graphic images of Black boys and men who have been gunned down by cops. And that is absolutely brutal. It's absolutely wrong. And it's disgusting, disturbing, and we need to correct for that as well. When police violence is visited upon Black women and girls, it's usually sexual, with living victims. And and living survivors, rather. So I think there's something around, when crafting policy, understanding that, at least in New York City specifically, most or a lot of Black women and girls have had interactions with police that were sexually violent in nature, right? So policy can be informed by that reality and understanding. And then policy can also be informed by the fact that all that has been taken from Black communities, we can provide a function of restitution and how we design and craft the way that the city runs. And that's what I think we can use to begin correcting or making more equitable this horrible, depressing world that we all live in. But yeah.
Yeah, there was
Arielle,
something.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I didn't
No,
want
go
to jump
ahead,
in.
Shawnda.
I just
No.
wanted to put a few exclamation points behind what you were saying. So I'm doing this, because I need to do that, especially around the idea of violence and sexual violence. And I think I've talked about in sort of many spaces and many places the idea that we don't really have a full understanding of the scope of violence that Black women and girls face. And that, in actual brutality, because in addition to the sexual violence that that women and girls face at the hands of law enforcement officers, there's also whole ass brutality, and especially for Black women and girls who resist the categorization of girl. And even the ones that do, we're not seen as sort of that traditional, white middle class sort of representation of what, a woman is or what a girl is that deserves protection at all. And so I think there's this way that it just sort of like, we have this understanding that Black women and girls just kind of that we exist and that we're fine, especially when you put us up against that comparative paradigm with Black men and boys, and I think it's unhealthy, and we don't and I just want to build really quickly sort of off of that, because I'm most interested myself in sort of conversations that are about meeting the needs of vulnerable people, like I said, the ones we're willing to throw away, especially children and women who have been impacted by the justice system and the child welfare system. And I think that particular attention really has to be directed at understanding the ways that these two systems work together to contribute to sort of mass incarceration and criminalization of Black women and girls. I know that research tells us things like in New York City, or New York State rather, our prison system is overwhelmingly filled with poor Black and brown women. About half of them have been diagnosed with severe mental illnesses. I know that about 9 out of 10 report struggling with substance abuse and alcohol abuse problems. The majority of those women have been impacted by severe abuse as children, and about 9 out of 10 report being victims of sexual violence. And then the children of these women end up being shuffled into the child welfare system, where they end up facing a cascade of sort of further violence and criminalization, and the cycle continues. It really ends up being just a pipeline into the adult to the adult systems. And I'm particularly sort of perplexed at how we I think about the sort of why children sort of end up in our child welfare system, where we sort of are charged with protecting them, and I think only about 15% of them end up there for reasons that are related to abuse, or about 85% of them end up there for reasons related to criminalized poverty. And they get there through policies like drug testing, women at hospitals that serve poor women, without their consent. So I just wanted to add to that, just because I felt like that violence piece, when it comes to sort of Black women and girls, and the ways that that's connected to the sort of history of racialized and sexualized violence in this country, we run away from it because it's outside of our scope of understanding.
Right.
When there's so much that you all have raised around broadening the definition of violence. I know that's something that Diane talks about a lot, and again, Diane would talk about it anyway, because we, in conversations like this, we really just want to have the conversation. I know one of the things that I think about for all of us, regardless of who you care about, who you support, this person is also managing policies for your body as well. And as I've started welcoming a little bit more of like really identifying the things that have been violent in my life, right, and the ways that we've been connected to systems, the flip side is what you are actually speaking about, that connects all three of you all and what you're speaking about, which is, so how do we define protection, right? Not even just safety, because I think safety often gets funneled into like law enforcement and police. Do you defund? Do you not defund? But we're talking broadly about protection. Who deserves to be protected, right? When that 9-year-old was sprayed just not even a full month ago, 9-year-old sprayed directly in their eyes. And the officers doubled down that was not only the right thing to do, but that they were lucky it wasn't more than that. There wasn't a protest, there wasn't a rally, there wasn't to Shawnda's point, oh my God, that's a child. That didn't happen, at least not collectively. Now in our circles, definitely, the conversations happen. But this is actually where government is supposed to intervene. And this is the tension that we have as to how do we include people into the conversation when it feels like these systems are harming them. So I want to take seriously what Arielle had mentioned, which is like introducing restitution as a way to, what Qiana said, inviting people in differently, is something that I think we really have to think about. Like, we can't just keep extracting people for their ideas, because they give them, but then we have to get to a place where people also are like getting whole again, right? And that people that being whole and thriving, not just surviving, is also something that the government or their environment or their electeds are also invested in. And that's in our policies, but it's also in the practices and in the programs and in the investments and in the value. We can talk about budget all day long.
Right.
Do our budgets allow us to be protected?
Right.
Qiana, you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, what comes up for me, and something that I wanted to lift up, and I'm glad it's coming up in this way so we can unpack it, is, when I think about the future and I think about like internally, we have existing initiatives we have existing agencies within our municipal government. We have existing initiatives that are supposedly supporting our most impacted folks in our communities. And yet we see that there's failures or stopgaps to that, or resources aren't getting to those groups. And I think, having a way to, redefine what protection is, redefine what genuine leadership is. I love the idea of incorporating like a true, not just accountability structure, but like function of restitution. And I think there's opportunities where it's this type of visioning that needs to be integrated in our existing agencies and channels and initiatives that are supposedly supporting things like, youth homelessness or career readiness, and see the opportunities to have the intersectionality, not just between where to reallocate funds in the budget, but also are these initiatives and programs really rooted in equity? Are we really rooted? Are the people driving this work and people who know this work? But also are the plans that are happening, are the implementation truly able to get down to the ground? And are we leveraging what is already in existence of our budget and of our systems to really do that? And I think it's that framework of that core principle in each agency has to hold that and see that consistently. And that comes from the top down sometimes, but it also has to work from the bottom up. And then I think, when people say like this, oftentimes I feel like when we want to transmute energy or change to action, people say these are not the things that we can do in our systems. And I think that what we're lifting up are practical ways that it can be in our systems. And I think, to me, it's like, we love in policy some precedents. So, and we love saying like, let's, move things here from there. But what I'm saying is, let's do that with a true intersectional platform and vision, and see and really look again at what even the current city government and structure and initiatives are, and be willing to change those from the bottom up to really then be able to allocate the resources, the restitution, the contracts, the practices that are relevant to the most impacted, because they're informed by the most impacted. And therefore the results should start to change and transition to that, as opposed to the status quo. And so that budget line just flows into the certain way, and then that silo into that agency, but really seeing like there's an opportunity here to generally make some pivots even within our systems. And that this is not the work that's going to happen probably in 1 year or even one administration, but to really, again, hold ourselves accountable, but also be realistic about the timeline to transformative change. But if we really put the resources and praxis there, I feel like we would start to see that. And I think oftentimes our candidates are scared to change what needs to be changed from the inside out. And what I've been really inspired by, Diane, is not just your platform and intersectionality, but your willingness to be somebody to say like, this is what we need to call for now. These are the folks that need to be seen and engaged. And this is the way forward. And this is a start within, your campaign, but these are genuine practical ways that we can see this in the future forward.
That's actually a great transition. I promise, Diane, I did not pay Qiana for that eloquent transition into what just was supposed to be. Y'all can check the run of show is there to hear from Diane a little bit before we get into a deeper dive. And I want to say deeper dive because y'all know, I mean, I don't think Black women, in my opinion, get enough, and Black femme folk, Black non-gender conforming folk, definitely not non-binary communities, get enough time to do what Qiana just mentioned, which is not just identify a policy, but also talk about the way the system works, right? To question and test the assumptions that are like, I know y'all have this budget line for ... but that doesn't even work for us. We don't even see that money, right? Like we don't create those spaces where community can push back and say, if I were to run the city that way, I wouldn't run it that way. And in many ways, we don't invite those people. We don't invite them to the roundtables at City Hall. We don't even the rallies that are supposed to be the rallies at the steps of City Hall. That's all staged. We've all been there. They, we all get the script and we know, what we're supposed to say on three, we, put our fist up and then we go home. But if you've ever been in a place where somebody who wasn't quite invited shows up, they got an issue with City Hall, but they may have an issue with the person right next to them too. And that's going to be the right time. Things are just going to get settled. And there's not a wrong time. And sometimes it's like, when can we also stand in the gap to be like, and that's right. There's nothing wrong with that. That is how our community engages. And if we prioritize engagement, right, really prioritize authentic engagement, which is people showing up, people contributing, people being valued, and us taking what they say seriously and transforming it so that they see that there's progress. That, in essence, it doesn't matter the issue. That is how you keep people connected to what we call democracy, which is still an experiment, right? Still an experiment that people are still trying to see if it's real. So Dianne, I would love for you to share, when I met you, even before I knew who you were discussing intersectionality, that if I'm going to be honest with you, you hear people run and they say these things, you're like, God bless her heart. Yeah, I believe that. But child, they ain't gonna let you do none of that shit. So, keep going, but I'm gonna pray for you, support Black women, hashtag. And then you would show up at the next place and you would say it again. And I'm like, oh, she's not gonna let go of this intersectionality thing. And now we know you'll get calls from folks like, did you really mean such and such? And you're like, that's what I said, which is also a form of consistency. But I wanted to share with you why, even in the midst of these terms like progressive and liberal and Democrat, why it's very important for you to be like, no, those are not the same thing, intersectional, and why it's important for you to center that even on your website and your materials for intersectional realities and intersectional problem solving to be the way we actually get to the root cause of these issues, not just put a Band-Aid on these issues.
I don't know. Quite frankly, I appreciate that, but I don't really know how to separate those things, right? And I'm just bringing all of me into this process and not trying to fit into anyone's neat box about, what a candidate is supposed to be, what candidates are supposed to be saying. And this is, like I said, in my opening comments, like this is just sort of like an extension of who I am and the work that I have done, right? And so the understanding that the people that I have spent my career, when I talk about career, like personal is political, right? Like for so long in the beginning of my career, I was struggling with that sort of Anglo concept of like separation between work and work-life balance, and there there's some things to be said for that, right? For like that's about self-care. But the way when you think about work-life balance, the way that was originally sort of pushed out, it was in such a way that those of us who do this kind of work, right, you struggle with trying to figure out how to do that work-life balance when so much of our work is personal, right? And the personal is political, and it is, you can't separate who you are from the work that you do. You might need to draw some boundaries in terms of caring for yourself, right? But you can't separate those things. And for me, everything that I have done has always been informed by, identity and lived experiences. And those things are not things that happen in these neat silos, particularly in our communities that are so layered, not just with in terms of identity, but in terms of oppressions, right? Which one of us on this screen has only experienced one kind of oppression, right? And experiences that one kind of oppression separate from others. And so, if we're really going to move towards a place of addressing the complex, comprehensive, complicated challenges that our communities face, we have to look at it. We have to deal with our challenges through that lens, which is, intersectional, multi-perspective, like whatever the word, however we want to. I'm very grateful for the language, right? Because I think language is important. But the work has to be informed by the community and by those that are most directly impacted, right? To go back to what Shawnda was talking about earlier, we have to, I believe that we have to give the power and the voice to those people, right? To our community members. And that all of us, right? We have to be able to bring all of us into the addressing of the challenges that we face. And let me tell you something, I spent a lot of time, I have reconciled with the fact that I spent a lot of my career, I spent at least a decade of my career making myself smaller so that other people could feel comfortable, not bringing my full self into spaces. And I know exactly the moment in my career where I decided I am not doing that anymore, where I recognized and understood the harm and the violence that was causing to me, right? And in turn, as a caregiver, as a leader, as a mother, as a head of household, how that violence had a ripple effect on my community, right? And so, making this sort of conscious decision to step into all of me, to own all of that, and to take whatever space was necessary to be fully, was not something that I did lightly or unconsciously or without recognition of like the risks associated with it, right? Because there's nobody out, that's not true. We're embracing, we're supporting, we're celebrating, right? But society, right, and what the norms tell us is that that's not okay for us. And so, to me, that is part of the harm and also part of the healing, right? And this, Qiana was talking about, the way we need to build, I would say build power and sort of heal. And I think that for me, this process is about beginning that journey of healing for us and for our communities. And that means moving towards restitution, reparation, undoing the harms, undoing the systems and the structures. And I recognize that that's not going to happen overnight. But I think that unless we're unequivocal on the front end about the intent and the need, I don't know how we actually do that, right? Like, so to me, it is critically important to put an unequivocal stake in the ground about what is necessary, right? And about the whole thing, not just a piece of it, right? And so that has been, I am unapologetic about that. And that is not, and what has been interesting too about this particular journey for me is that, now you hear other folks in the race kind of signaling slightly a little bit about that. But there's I have some mixed feelings about that too. Part of me is like, I'll take it because, maybe somebody will hold your feet to the fire. And then there's a concern for me too about like, that's just signaling, right? And so like, let's not get it twisted, quite frankly. right? And you know, so it's important to me, and I think that we are I personally believe that we are at a unique point in our history to be able to do that because of this moment in time, and because of the multiple crises, and because of the exacerbation of the crises, and you know, like all of that, and also because of the sort of somewhat unprecedented coalition and the surge and the movement that we have been experiencing, right? That we can actually be unapologetic about putting that stake in the ground and saying, no, this is not, we're not settling for anything less. This is ours, and we're claiming that. And so, you know, it started off for me as kind of like that. I felt a little bit, quite frankly, like that crazy Black woman that keeps talking about this stuff, right? And what has happened is, you know, there was that dismissal, that reductivism, which is also, by the way, you know, I don't say this lightly, all sorts of, also forms of violence, our erasure, and our, you know, being reduced into less than who we are and what we are and the space that we deserve. That's just a different form of violence as far as I'm concerned. And so, you know, it started like that, and now it's starting to feel different, because I think that there are increasingly more people who are willing to suspend disbelief around what could be possible in this moment in time. And that's what I'm banking on, is, you know, enough of us organizing, mobilizing, and strategizing to suspend that collective disbelief, to collectively make that choice, and to keep this movement moving forward.
Thank you for that, Dianne. I do think that one of the things I remember when Obama was running, and the concept of hope was seen as, you know, again, one of those, like, I don't want to say pie in the sky type of a things, but if we're not hopeful, then like what else? Like, why are we here, right? When many people who could left New York City, it was our people that stayed, not only stayed behind, but they literally created moments of joy. They created mutual aid efforts before the city created a strategy. They were doing their own racial data analysis. My team, we launched COVID While Black before there was even a racial commission for the city. People were just doing what they needed to do. And I think that one of the things I hear you also saying, or one of the things that I hope that comes from this, is like how we keep track of our own history, right? How we keep track of the ways that we have been responsive to our own people. And that also serves as a way, to your point, when we start having those dominant culture narratives, start questioning who we are and how we show up, to remind ourselves that, like, no, every time we show up, we are problem solvers, but we also bring joy, right? Like, we bring butter, we bring laughs, you know, every delivery person, I will never forget when I finally, there's an amazing Chinese American laundry service that's near my home. And I couldn't speak to them for like 3 months. When I called them back, literally on the first ring, "Oh, Ife, is that you?" And literally came over, said hi to the dog. They ain't never liked my dog, to be clear, anytime before that. But like the way that, even as we were told that we had to be physically distant, the socializing, right? And what that meant to see people again. And then what that also meant to us, for us to still be serving each other. I just want to highlight that, because your one of your slogans, or one of your campaign messages, is choose the future. And I do hope that people recognize that you can be stuck with government for a very long time, and the consequences of government for a very long time. And I just hope that we are brave enough to gamble on us. That's why we're having this conversation. We don't believe this is the end of Black History Month. It's never the end of Black History Month. What are you talking about? And so I wanted to, but as we merge this concept of expanding our minds as to the practice of Black feminist inclusion, and that Black feminism, in many ways, because of who we are, has always been very broad, when it comes to the village. I want to now kind of go in a roundtable style and ask each of y'all, and just keeping track of time, really about like just like 2 minutes to really focus on a specific area where we need to be radically different. And I don't mean just like in the discussion of the topic, but I do think that there is a discussion of the topic. I want to thank you again, Arielle, for bringing up sexual violence, because that is also something that does not necessarily get discussed in a broad government setting. And then many times it is often, if we're going to be honest, whitewashed, right? In kind of like an all lives matter way that doesn't allow us to really talk about why it's different and how early it starts for young queer kids, for young Black kids. You add colorism on top of that, you add poverty on top of that, you add weight on top of that. It becomes a profiling thing, right? And then the profiling is what becomes normalized. So then nobody says anything about it anymore. So I want to thank you for raising that, because we don't typically talk about that as a government priority. So I'm going to just ask each of you to raise and for about 2 minutes, just share with us an area that is deeply centered or deeply important for you, and what we can do radically, even if it's just one thing that you feel like a city could do radically different. I would love to hear from you. So I would like to start, Arielle, if you don't mind, I would love for you to start.
Yeah, happy
And what
to.
you've been thinking. I also
Um,
want to shout out Arielle. Arielle would never share this, but Arielle was part of BLM NYC. BLM NYC were the drafters of part of the drafting table for Divest to Invest.
yeah,
And that's important to note, because people do not know the journey that defund the police did not come just
yeah.
from nowhere. And there was
I
a lot of
know. I didn't think
pizza,
it was
and there
gonna
was a lot
happen
of
this quickly
food.
either.
Yeah,
I was like,
right.
I thought
So
my son would be like 20, 30 years old before there was a mass scale conversation about it. So I'm happy it's
I just
happening
want to thank
sooner.
you, and thank
Oh,
to
thank
all the
you.
comrades that were a part of that. Shawnda, everyone that was a part of that. I think, Mama's bailout, all that stuff. We can't
Oh
forget
yes.
those things, because just because the masses are here doesn't mean that we didn't have breadcrumbs. So just wanted to put that out there.
Thank you. So I mean, absolutely. I think a big beginning for us that I think can just fundamentally transform how New York City works is like really reconsidering these police budgets. I think that's just such a specific thing to do. I really want to lift up like Andrea Ritchie, Miriam Kaba for their work on this, and how they have been studying the ways that police function against Black children. And you talk about queer and trans children and their interactions with the police, or children who are unhoused. And what's terrifying when we look at how I would call it an epidemic, the way that an understudied epidemic, and how police engage in sexual assault of Black girls, Black children, Black youth. There's no mechanism for accountability, right? Because what are we going to tell people who survive this terror that they need to go to the police and file a report? Like, that's just ridiculous. It's not, that's not how that works. You look at how, when it comes to the overtime and pay, how a lot of police will specifically jam people up right at the end of their shift so they can get overtime. Like, that's terrible. This is like the most specific example of abuse of power that I could ever come across. So for me, I think we need to fundamentally detach public safety from policing. And that looks like really reforming these budgets in such a way that we're investing in education, that we're investing in social services, that we're investing in a lot of mechanisms that will truly provide care, I think, to Black kids, particularly Black girls. Looking at mental health services as well. You cannot tell me that these children who are in many respects live in war zones, don't have mental health needs that need to be addressed quickly, right? Acting out in school and whatnot, that's not a terrible child. That's a child that's surviving through something and trying to cope, right? Like guidance counselors and other folks to really support young kids and girls specifically. These, Black girls aren't fast. Are you kidding? They're not fast. Not at all. There's no child on the planet that's fast. No, it's the way that we see these are girls, right? He talks about, see, I'm like stumbling now because I'm getting like really kind of emotional just thinking about the totality of the situation. So for me, I absolutely think it's critical. It's a necessity that we transform these police budgets in such a way we divest from these over-policing measures, the violence that we see stem from an institution that shares lineage with slave patrols, right? We divest from that and invest in our schools and mental health services and proper housing and proper public health and so much more, which I really think will allow for a better New York City.
Look at that. And in 2 minutes. Look, didn't have to bring the Sandman or nothing. That was amazing. Qiana, I would like to go to you and get your thoughts as to what we can radically change in this city, especially for Black communities, Black femme and women and girls.
Yeah, my lens kind of lands on like food and food justice and food sovereignty. And, I recall like the Mayoral Food Forum that was like built by emergency and academic folks. And I really appreciated that, Diane, that you were calling out food sovereignty as opposed to just food or this reliance or trying to show just the successes of emergency food, but really changing the paradigm or the frame that emergency food it's still rooted in an immediate response. It's not actually dismantling the model of need. And it still works from a lens of scarcity, except for the interests that benefit from it. And I think for a city to move forward, we need to stop trying to find the wins in our status quo. And I think, we need to start, again, acknowledging, calling it what it is. So with a lens of like food, I think we are still living in a system of food apartheid, of purposeful segregation of resources, land, and power. So food has been used as a weapon within our communities. And I think even when we rely on emergency models, what we're actually highlighting are the channels between large scale commodity farmers, so not diversified farmers and agriculture and production, corporate interests, surplus, a system that is built on surplus to then find a way to either get the highest price, bring, the dignity of the food, the quality of food continues to decrease in that time frame. And then by time it gets to be seen as waste to be rescued, it is then dumped into our communities. Those to me are not wins. Those can be recycled purposes, but there's a big difference between immediate and emergent response. And I think in the lens of food, we need to, if we're going to truly get to food justice and food sovereignty, we need a city that is working towards the divesting from the reliance of emergency models and the support of that and the degradation of our communities, and really shifting towards resiliency and finding ways to shift city funds, the city budget, again, in better actual acknowledgement of what is already in our budget. Because I think what we're going to keep hearing moving forward is the city's going through tight times, that there isn't money. And, I think we don't have the right relationship amongst our mayor and our governor, which is its own struggle and issue. And I think has had detriment impact on food models and enterprise and policy. But there will be a city budget. And just like Arielle was saying, like we need better dissemination and reallocation of city funds. And I think in the lens of food, we need those funds to be more equitably disseminated, not just in emergency models, but in models that feed our community. So fuel community as well as feed our community. And I think that lives in our food justice and sovereignty work. And I think on the city level, it's shifting funds to community-driven models that offer solutions of and by the community. That means finding better ways to support the infrastructure in our neighborhoods now to be resilient. And that's a lens of enterprise, urban agriculture, small businesses, and the intersection of climate resiliency. I think we still see a siloing of all of those realms. And we need a way forward where food is seen at the table of climate resiliency and change. I think, the grit of it all is a resilient food shed. And I think instead of us seeing our communities as just dumping grounds or end recipients, we need to be seen as incubators for community-based food hubs, incubators for small businesses, and not just and innovative land use. And I've mentioned this often, and I think this is something where I've heard current city folks like struggle or start to choke up at. But if we have a precedence of supporting worker cooperatives, and we know that we need to change, or we have this precedence of ongoing desire around land use, why are we not finding innovative ways to better have land stewardship, community land trust for urban ag production and enterprise of and by the community? And that's going to look like different policy where folks of color, folks of low income, folks of small scale are actually genuinely going to have resources allocated to them to be able to engage in the larger economy that will make for a resilient community, but actually be a multiplier effect of the dollar that is invested in them.
Mm, mm, mm. Shawnda, every time you speak, Qiana, I also get hungry, right? It's just like, because food just sounds like it would taste better if we had more Qianas there. I'm like,
I think it would.
On the back end.
That farm to table situation is really lit. So I'm here for it. I just need you to know.
I mean, the majority of the farmers and small business owners that I know are like Black and brown femmes, and the food be popping. So I'm just saying, I can't quantify it, but I think we can build some evidence-based research down the road.
I know, and I'm here to test these theories if people need that kind of support.
Same. I'll make sure the next conversation we have, we'll have a box. That's what we should do. We should get a box from like a Black farmer and just send it to folks, and then get a Black wine. That we're gonna do it right next time. We're gonna do it right.
Yeah, and retroactive works too for me. So however we need to do this, just let me know. I'm here for it.
Me too. So Shawnda, what are you thinking about as far as radical change, shift that could impact our community in a dramatic way, but in a necessary way?
Oh my God. So first, everything. I think I would start by making sure that folks like Qiana and Arielle were like in cabinet positions. I would just feel safer in my life, in my world, in my community, just knowing that they were there. You know what I'm saying? Looking after things and showing up for us. So that's first. Around things like reproductive justice, I'd like to see increased efforts to decrease the maternal mortality disparity that's faced by Black women through things like culturally competent midwives and doula services. I'd like us to just stop incarcerating girls broadly, just in full stop, period. And because we know that they get pushed into the justice system directly from things like child welfare, schools, and through policing practices. I want all Black women to have access to PrEP if they want it, because we still don't talk about the fact that Black women represent sort of a growing number of the new cases of HIV and AIDS, though the numbers in other communities are decreasing. I want us to stop drug testing women without their consent at hospitals and stop separating Black women from their children. The end, another full stop for me. I also want us to think about better responses to criminalized survivorhood. One thing that we know is that, we talked about sort of the failures of mainstream feminism. And so one place that sort of Black women continually get left out of the conversation is around responses to domestic violence. And so we know that we already hold negative perceptions about Black women and girls. We already feel that we don't need to be protected. So women who resist abuse are jailed, and then they're separated from their children and processed through specialized courts like domestic violence courts that view them as perpetrators rather than victims, and respond to them then with criminalization instead of protection. And that sort of, unleashes a whole, wave of a whole avalanche of other processes that sort of further marginalize and make them vulnerable. It contributes to them being unhoused. It contributes to their children being unhoused. And it makes their sort of job situations tenuous. On and on and on. Lastly, I'd love it if Black girls and children broadly had more access to high stakes educational opportunities like specialized high schools, because we tend to leave children, especially the ones who are performing well, out of the conversation. And we don't think that we need to do anything to support them and to make sure that they have the ability to live into their fullest potential and to have joy.
Mm, mm. So it was that roundtable. Did you want to add anything, Diane, to that, as far as something that you radically would like to see shift?
So the only thing I would add to that, who said everything? Somebody up here said everything, and I was
Shawnda.
like, okay, that's it. Yeah, that's it. Everything. Thank you. The only thing I would want to name specifically is what we call the care economy, right? We know that 4 out of 5 women are actually more likely to be the sole providers for their families. And that means, when things like the shutdown happen, they also become the primary caregivers for their kids in that moment who are not going to school, which has a disproportionate impact on them and their ability to provide for their family. So, moving towards universal care, childcare, so that everybody has access to it, right? Also making sure that the people in those industries who are also predominantly Black women are being paid for the work, right? Quality pay, right? Paid family leave, medical leave, those kinds of things. We also know that our communities were disproportionately impacted by the job loss, right? In all of this, without adequate protections, and that our communities were the ones least to be called back to work, right? When people started going back to work. And so, I think there's something to be said for thinking about how we care for those who care for our children, and provide for them, and actually recognize the legitimacy of that industry and that sector in such a way, right? Because we also are, it's also our Black women who take care of other people's children and make it possible for other people to do their thing, whether it's, as nannies or in the childcare center or at the daycare or whatever it is and so making sure that we are actually, as part of the solidarity economy plan that we're putting forth with the campaign, that we're also centering and elevating the Black women who do the work of, maintaining their families and their households, and also the childcare for other people and other people's families. So, and whatever that, from the salaries to the protections, and all of the benefits and access that they need to have. I think that's an important thing for us to name, because that is what I've been referring to lately as the sort of backbone and the heart and soul of the city, and that kind of work. And it is being done by Black women. So that's the other thing I want to name specifically.
Oh, yeah. Diane, hold on. I just want to say, not just the care of our children, like really fast. It's like the whole economic engine of our city. It's like they're caring for our children, they're caring for our old people, they're caring for
elders,
our sick.
Yep.
Yeah, and often at the expense of caring for their own children and caring for their own families. And so, when we think about feminism, we think about the fact that literally the labor of Black women makes it possible for us to show up and have conversations like, can we have it all? Yeah,
Yep.
because Renita is at the house looking after your mama.
That's
So,
Mhm.
you
That's
know,
right.
I just want to
That's
make
right.
sure to like, bring that into
No,
the conversation. The fact that
yeah.
I seen a study that said, if and you get 2 for 1. I seen a study I think a couple years ago by maybe it was Casey, that said if you want to help Black girls say help their mom.
Mhm.
you know
Mhm.
and it's
Yep.
like
Mhm.
literally if you were creating a better situation for my mom, that trickle down, that would create a better situation for
That's
me.
right.
Mhm.
And so
That's
i
Mhm.
just
right.
i just
Because
wanted to follow that
yeah,
up.
no, you're right. Right. The home health aides, right? We know what that. You know who they are. We know who they are, right? The child care, like there's a whole. When I talk about the care economy, it's all those people that are taking care of it, the disability, the elders, our children. There's a whole economy there, and it is comprised primarily of Black women
Mhm.
workers, and they're not being paid their due, and they're not being protected, and they don't have any kind of safety net, and they've been hardest hit. They're also the providers for their families, right? So to your point about the ripple effect, we take care of them. We are taking care of generations because that's what they're doing.
I think
So
what also makes it hard to um, even hard for people to believe that it can be the reality that the same, caretaker who's taking care of somebody else's family at the expense of their own family also may have a child or a family member or a loved one who is sitting in Rikers right now, right? That also has the system and society in some ways benefiting off of their body and their labor in a different way. And that's just because it's Sunday, right? Like the everyday reality of way too many people in this city is that there's a normalized extraction of who they are on both ends of the stick with no real uh, 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 repair or no real acknowledgement. And so I do want to highlight that, as Diane said, there are things that sound really, really glossy to pick from liberation spaces and movement spaces. But at the core of everything that's happening is really dignity. And there is a dignity in this work. There is a dignity. There was a dignity in enslaved women who breastfed other children before they could even breastfeed their own, who in many ways, at many times, birthed children. Um, Even though their bodies were not treated with the dignity of what a true birthing is that we're still seeing today. And so it's really important for us to call out the ways we show up, even in spite of subhumane treatment, a life that does not call for worthiness, and the ways that we reclaim that anyway. Um, and there is a reclaiming. My mother is a nurse, and right when everybody was talking about vaccines was when she caught COVID. And that reality that we felt of like everyone else is going to get better, but our people was a real thing that we felt like we've been waiting for this moment and we don't know what's going to happen. So I want us to think about that and the ways that we can continue, even as we get into what's seen largely as Women's Month, like the ways that we create dignity for those spaces where we hold space, for those spaces where we are disproportionately in those spaces caring for other people. And as Diane mentioned, it wasn't necessarily considered the most sexiest thing when she was first raising it, but care economy is actually a growing industry. I mean, people are in the field of caring for other people, but to Diane's point, and even what Shawnda had raised, there is a lack of respect, if we're honest with ourselves, um, from both the formal and informal economies, that domestic workers, immigrant women, Black women, brown women occupy, that literally keep this city afloat, pandemic or no pandemic, right? There were still people going into people's homes, taking care of other people's kids to risk of their own health and their family's health. And that's something we have to call out and acknowledge. So in this final round before we close, this is kind of the popcorn round. And this is where you get to give one recommendation. I'm just going to run through a list of a couple topics, and you're going to give one recommendation on what we could radically shift in that space. And then we're going to go into the next. We're going to only go through like 3 rounds, but maybe we'll have a bonus round if y'all want to also throw out a topic that we haven't raised. The first one is education, right? We have it was just announced that there is a new DOE chancellor, first Black woman chancellor of DOE. So the question that I have for you all is, what does she need to get rid of tomorrow? And I'm going to start with you, Shawnda. What should our new DOE chancellor get rid of tomorrow or add tomorrow?
Okay, I was over here. I had my hand on the buzzer, like I was gonna get a prize. I was like, oh, school resource officers. That's the answer. Thanks.
SRO.
Yeah.
Shawnda.
For 1,000, Alex.
I feel like Arielle's maybe close. Arielle, what's your recommendation?
So I was gonna say the school resource officers, but I will say a white ass literary curriculum. Let it go. Our kids need some culturally competent books to read.
To the left. Qiana, what would you add or get rid of?
I would add procurement coordinators that have a lens of seasonality and cultural relevancy for our school foods. And the food that happens in the system, the food that's grown on the land of school buildings, and what is being sent home.
You can't be mad at Qiana because she's consistent.
She's gonna stay on food.
She's consistent.
When she said that she is on food,
I was trying. I mean, I was gonna say infrastructure, but
the next one I'm gonna say is healthcare. Let me tell you something. Kiana's gonna be like, that food in that lobby, in that hospital, the food in the hospital has to change. And you know what? You're right. You are right. Actually. You're right. The next one, I'm actually gonna shift a little bit.
Wait, I don't get to answer that one?
Oh my gosh, I'm sorry, Diane. No, you do get to answer.
I got mine.
What is it?
Suspensions. She needs to get rid of suspensions.
Yes. So, as long as they don't replace it with some other, because you know how they be doing.
Yes.
Suspensions.
Yes.
So we got SROs, suspensions. The white curriculum, it really has to go. I mean, can we just get factual? You know, we need a factual history. And then the procurement contracts for the food at the schools. I'm here with this list. I'm gonna then move on to our hospitals. De Blasio had made, well, let me not take away, we mentioned Cuomo a couple times. We're not talking about the fact that Cuomo cut Medicaid in the midst of a pandemic. I don't know how that doesn't compute, but that happened. That was real. That had impact on how H&H and hospitals in our neighborhoods were shaped. So, incoming mayor, there's no real restrictions. When we think about futurism to protect Black lives, what needs to either be added or taken away? Arielle, I'm starting with you.
I guess more accessible quality healthcare. I won't pretend that I'm like an expert on public health, but
No.
I just think it needs to get better. Shorter wait times, more funding for hospitals, more locations for people to get their healthcare needs met. Going to the hospital shouldn't bankrupt anybody. So things like that.
Yep. Accessibility. Diane, I want to make sure I don't forget you because
so I'm going to say, I think I've been talking about this. I think we need to increase access to integrated community health clinics that focus on education and prevention so that we can get our folks on the front end.
Qiana.
So I'm gonna put a pin on food, but my mom is in a nursing facility and has been so for like 10 years. So when we talk about the impacts to to elders and seniors and the care economy, that really resonates for me. And I think what we need is to bring back the concern of our seniors and to bring back resources into our elder care facilities and better wages and protections for our elder care workers. They're like on
Thank
the
you for
front
that reminder.
lines, and they
Mhm.
just don't seem supported. And we know like the infrastructure hasn't been supported. Their wages are quite low. And the cuts around Medicaid will definitely have direct impact on service.
Absolutely, absolutely. There's so many seniors that have also gone back into the labor market out of force, and we
Yeah.
don't talk about that really at all. Shawnda.
Okay, so for me, in the like land of infinite resources, I would say first and foremost universal, like just universal healthcare broadly. Hello, like this shouldn't even be a conversation. I think access to sort of alternative forms of healthcare. So people who are not sort of as Black people, we have reasons to sort of trust our sort of traditional healthcare system. So I think people should have access to alternative healthcare and healing resources. Um, I also think that that thing around mental health, like so people have access to health around their physical body, but sort of not their mental and emotional selves, and that has really catastrophic consequences for us. And lastly, thinking about our most vulnerable, thinking about the people who are in confinement, and recognizing that they don't get sort of adequate care at all. Not even close to approaching adequate. And I've known a number of people who've lost their lives recently, because they didn't get care when they were confined.
I'm actually switching my last one because there was an area that Shawnda raised, which is a community that often gets seen as like over there, which are individuals who are either currently incarcerated or have been incarcerated, right? And so what needs to change for individuals that are returning home in this city? What radically needs to change for any part of that process that you feel like is really important for us to secure the safety of our communities, and obviously that has a ripple effect on other communities. So I'll start with you, Diane. When you think about those who are returning or those who are engaged contact with the legal system.
I mean, so honestly, the first thing I thought of was that we need to stop sending people to prison. That was the first thing, right? We need to stop that cycle on that end. And then I think, in terms of people coming home, we need to make sure they have a place to live, and we need to make sure that we are providing them with some means for them to, become self-sufficient, right? And that if that means support with jobs, guaranteeing jobs, food, and to Shawnda's point, the mental health stuff, right? I mean, that transition back and connections to community, and an opportunity to feel like they are welcome back into the community. And that starts, I think, with providing them with the essentials that they need to be able to come back in dignity.
Yeah, agreed. Qiana?
Yeah, I would just echo what Shawnda and Diane lifted up. I think we don't offer holistic, feasible resources to folks re-entering our communities, and then yet expect them to be able to jump into the same cycle of struggle that we're all facing. And I think that we need that, like, access to mental care. I really appreciate the concept of healing and other forms of healing and mental health and support. And I think there's a way to connect to, again, existing initiatives and programs, and not just on the resources on the individual side, but also is the city offering resources and incentives to organizations in the community to offer, genuine connection, resources, and opportunities. So there's a not an extractive pipeline, but maybe a more restorative pipeline.
Agreed. Everything doesn't have to have nyc.gov slapped on it, right? It can come It can come from the community. It should have the face of the community. And if we redefine what government's role is, that is actually how we expand power. Arielle.
Pie in the sky. I would like to see maybe a truth and reconciliation process of some kind, because I strongly, so I look at toxic masculinity, and I strongly believe that the prison industrial complex has a lot to do with how Black men treat Black women. And I think it's time that we really come to have a comprehensive overview or understanding of what exactly goes on inside of these prisons. So that's what my pie in the sky answer.
Wow. Yeah, truth and reconciliation is a dream of mine, in all regards. And it wouldn't even be like one day. It'll be like truth and reconciliation Monday, food, Tuesday, reproductive justice. We would just have like, it would literally be a full year of just truth. And then we can talk about reconciliation. I appreciate you saying that, because I think some of what we're also discussing is re-examining the systems that we feel like always have to be here, and we don't talk about how they come to be. And I will add that in addition to in the binary world, like male, female relations, we don't talk about how like the extension of like this oppressive enslaved history still has its ways that are rooted in racialized capitalism, right? Which is the way we should be talking about capitalism. It's not just capitalism, it's the fact that there has to be a race component for it to be successful. So I appreciate you sharing that. And then Shawnda, would love for you to share what you think radical change to the carceral system, or for those that are returning home.
All right. Well, I mean, y'all done said it. I come through and put a little sprinkle on something, but like, it's every time Arielle like picks up the mic, it's like the person inside of my head, who's like sitting off to the side, and who I'm like, don't say that, it's too much. What? They gonna listen to that. Arielle says it, and I'm like,
Arielle.
The person in my mind was like, see, she said it. And I'm like, okay, you right. So
and this is calm, Arielle. I just want people to
yeah.
know.
So you know what I mean? I feel like that woman at the Apollo who like stands up at every act. I feel like I'm her right now. Like
I
I'm just
live
standing
for
up
her.
and I'm
And
holding.
it was how she stood up, because
Yes, she would just get into that groove, and she would try to hold Jodeci's hand. Yes. So I feel like her right now. But I guess what I'll say is I'll start from the inside out. And I think that, and I'll just kind of anchor it in this quote that that stuck with me from like the Subways, the MTA's like Poetry in Motion series. And the quote said, "Those who poke out the people's eyes reproach them for their blindness." So I think starting with sort of acknowledging the fact that the reasons why folks end up in prison are artificial, they're created. We do that shit to people, right? And then we send them there, and then we get mad at them because they're there and they get out, and then we're like, see, you're fucked up. That's why you were there anyway. It's like an abusive relationship. It's the ultimate ass gaslight. And it really it makes me very angry. So I think I would start by thinking through sort of while folks are inside, thinking through what healing actually could look like. So thinking about some of the root causes of why folks ended up there, and thinking about providing ways to address them, thinking about the transformative power of education, thinking about how the likelihood of going back to jail decreases with every successive increase in level of education. So making sure that those who had the ability to do that could do that. And I know that even in New York, there are less of those opportunities at women's facilities. All those resources go directed to men's facilities. So, women get sort of knitting or something pink, and then, men get access to sort of college level classes. So thinking about that, also thinking, like you said, Diane, about making sure that people have housing, but not just housing, but safe housing in safe neighborhoods that are, that have jobs and good food and things that really sort of contribute to people's ability to sort of restart their lives, to be connected with their children, and sort of to be able to sort of employ sort of some of those skills that they got that empower them directly, that don't wait on some service or program or person to come through, making sure they actually have access to sort of, people to help them navigate, to make sure that they don't come out, without their IDs, to also make sure that folks, are on sort of supervision for the least amount of time possible, because just supervision increases the likelihood that people will go back sort of into prisons and jails, just because it's difficult to comply with all of the various requirements that sort of make it possible for them to live lives, one, and then, be able to comply with all of those things. So I think I said a lot, but, those are sort of the things.
Yeah, I want to end with Diane giving some final thoughts and remarks. I also want to thank each of you all, because Shawnda now has my mind. It's not the end. I'm actually like, with the things we're asking for, it's kind of like, it really is the epitome of Angela Davis's, like, being radical is just getting to the root, right? And people label us all the time and call us radical. And everything that we've named is really just trying to get at the root. Nothing was about money, cars, even free education or whatever. It's really about, like, give us the autonomy to be able to grow, take care of our families, and do it healthily and safely. And that's really what we're asking for. So Qiana, Shawnda, Arielle, I just want to thank you each for taking this time and really just expanding me, Diane, all of us with your wisdom. We want to thank you for how you show up for communities every day. The fact that you're with your families right now and away from your families to be with us, it's not a small thing. And so I know we, yes, Arielle, now go win. That's what we're going to do. And just want to invite everyone that sees this. I'm sure we'll be sharing clips later. We are in what we're calling Match Madness. It's ready. Got 11 more days to hit matching. So if you haven't contributed, any amount counts. Please go ahead and go to diane.nyc and contribute. Even if you have another candidate, that's fine. It's ranked choice voting. You can pick more than one, but at the end of the day, we should have a voice that elevates communities, even if it's not our experience that we're going through right now. So Diane, I just wanted to invite you to say thank you to our panelists and any final words.
Well, thank you to our panelists. Really, this was a joyful space, and I'm grateful for it, even despite the sort of difficulty and complexities of the topics that we've talked about. I appreciate, again, I knew I was going to enjoy this thoroughly as a way to end my day. Just a couple of sort of things. I think I referenced this earlier. I think we're at a crossroads in our history. And we're at a point where I think we need to reckon with the multiple pandemics that our communities have been plagued with for way too long. We've relied on the organizing genius and the energy of Black women for so long to dedicate, to actualize a democracy that really has never fully reflected us to begin with. And we've seen that, we saw that at the insurrection on the Capitol on January 6th. And we saw it again just last week when there was a failure to indict Daniel Prude's murderers in Rochester. And we know that the badges of slavery that stem from white supremacy that continues to refuse to relinquish power, right, and seeks to deny us of our humanity. I think we've all agreed here that the systems are working exactly the way they were intended. And we're at this crossroads here, and I hope that we can come together in such a way so as to demand that our city not goes back to normal, right? But that our city actually is created and rebuilt in partnership with our communities in a way that yields a new New York City. And that's, I'm here for that. I appreciate the opportunity to have this conversation with you all and lift up Black femme leadership and everything that we believe that our communities need. And I'm here to continue in the fight with all of you. And I really appreciate the partnership and the community. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Diane. Thank you all. We call the people that are in our space, the volunteers say they're the loving disruptors. So you all are connected to that loving disruption group. Thank you so much for being that squad. And we look forward to partnering with you soon. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Be safe.
Bye.
Be well, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.